The iron shackles bit into Nora Walsh's wrists as she stood in the back room of the Lucky Strike Saloon in Monticello, Utah, watching the man she had loved since childhood hand over the deed to her father's land, and a handwritten contract bearing her signature, a signature she had never written. It was March of 1881, and the desert wind howled outside as Samuel Thornton counted out the money that would save him from the gambling debts that had nearly cost him his life. Debts he had accumulated in less than 3 months of poker games and whiskey-fueled promises he could never keep. "Samuel, please," Nora whispered, her voice breaking as tears streamed down her face. "Do not do this. We can find another way. We can work. We can go to California like we planned." Samuel would not meet her eyes. His hands shook as he reached for the stack of bills that Cyrus Malone, the saloon owner and the most dangerous man in San Juan County, was counting out with meticulous precision. "I am sorry, Nora. I am so sorry, but they were going to kill me. You understand, do not you? I had no choice." "You had a choice," she said, her voice turning cold despite the tears. "You always had a choice. You chose the cards. You chose the whiskey, and now you are choosing your life over mine." Cyrus Malone laughed, a sound like gravel scraping against rock. He was a thick man with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that held no warmth, no mercy. "The girl understands the situation better than you do, Thornton. Now take your money and get out of my establishment before I change my mind about our arrangement." Samuel grabbed the money, stuffing it into his coat pockets with desperate, jerky movements. For just a moment, he looked at Nora, and she saw something flicker in his eyes, regret, perhaps, or shame, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "Goodbye, Nora," he said, and then he was gone, the door slamming behind him with a finality that made her knees weak. Nora stood there in her simple calico dress, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders, and felt the foundation of her entire world crumble beneath her feet. She was 22 years old, and the man she had planned to marry, the man she had given her heart to when she was just 15, had sold her like livestock to pay his debts. Her father had died 2 years ago from pneumonia, and her mother had followed him 6 months later, leaving Nora with nothing but the small plot of land they had worked so hard to keep. Samuel had convinced her to put his name on the deed as well, promising they would build their future together. She had trusted him completely. "Well now," Cyrus said, circling her like a vulture, "you are not much to look at, but you will do. I have debts of my own to settle, and a pretty young thing like you will fetch a good price in Denver. We leave in the morning." Nora's blood ran cold. "Denver? You cannot mean to." "I mean to do whatever makes me money, girl. Now, Martha will take you upstairs and get you settled. Do not try anything foolish. I have men watching every exit, and the nearest town is 30 miles away through desert that will kill you faster than any bullet." An older woman with tired eyes and a faded green dress appeared in the doorway. "Come along, dear," Martha said softly, her voice carrying a kindness that seemed out of place in this den of cruelty. Best not to anger him further. Nora followed Martha up the narrow staircase to a small room at the end of the hall. The room held nothing but a thin mattress on a wooden frame, a cracked wash basin, and a single window that looked out over the dusty main street of Monticello. Martha removed the shackles from Nora's wrists, revealing the angry red marks they had left behind. "Listen to me carefully," Martha whispered, glancing nervously at the door. "Cyrus is planning to take you to Denver in 2 days, not tomorrow. He lied about that. There is a cattle drive passing through town tomorrow evening, cowboys heading north with a herd. If you can get to them, if you can convince one of them to help you, you might have a chance. But you would have to move quickly, and you would have to be smart about it." "Why are you helping me?" Nora asked, studying the older woman's face. Because 20 years ago I was in your position, Martha said quietly, and nobody helped me. Now I am trapped here, working for that monster, and I will never be free, but you still can be. Before Nora could respond, heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway and Martha straightened up, her expression becoming carefully neutral. "You behave yourself, girl," she said loudly. "Mr. Malone does not tolerate trouble." She left, locking the door behind her, and Nora sank onto the mattress, her mind racing. She pressed her hands against her face and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to cry, 5 minutes to mourn the future she had planned, the love she had believed in, the innocence she had lost. Then she dried her tears, walked to the window, and began to plan. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Martha brought her breakfast and lunch, and each time she whispered small pieces of information. The cattle drive would arrive around sunset. The cowboys would likely make camp just outside of town near the creek. Cyrus would be busy with his evening poker games. The window in Nora's room was not nailed shut, and there was a narrow ledge that ran along the side of the building to a wooden trellis. When the sun finally began its descent toward the horizon, painting the Utah sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Nora heard the distant sound of cattle lowing and men shouting. Her heart began to pound. She waited until full dark, until she heard the raucous noise of the saloon below reach its peak, and then she pushed open the window. The March air was cold against her skin as she climbed out onto the ledge. She pressed herself against the wooden siding, inching along with careful, deliberate movements. Her fingers found the trellis, and she began to climb down, the old wood creaking beneath her weight. She was halfway down when a piece of the trellis broke away with a sharp crack. Nora fell, landing hard on the ground below. Pain shot through her ankle, but she bit back the cry that rose in her throat. She could hear voices from inside the saloon, and she forced herself to her feet, limping away from the building as quickly as she could manage. The night was dark, with only a sliver of moon to light her way, but she could see the orange glow of a campfire in the distance, beyond the last buildings of the town. She had made it perhaps 100 yards when she heard the shout behind her. "The girl has escaped. Find her." Terror gave Nora strength she did not know she possessed. She ran, ignoring the sharp pain in her ankle, ignoring the rocks that cut through her thin shoes, ignoring everything except the distant campfire that represented her only hope. She could hear men behind her, their voices carrying through the night air, and she knew they were gaining on her. She burst into the camp of the cattle drive, startling the cowboys who sat around the fire. There were 5 of them, dusty and tired from the day's work, and they stared at her in surprise as she stumbled forward, nearly falling into the fire. "Please," she gasped, her chest heaving as she struggled to breathe. "Please, you have to help me. They are going to take me to Denver. They are going to sell me, please." "What in tarnation?" one of the cowboys exclaimed, jumping to his feet. Then Cyrus Malone and 3 of his men appeared at the edge of the firelight, and Cyrus was holding a rifle. "That girl is my property," he said, his voice deadly calm. "She belongs to me, bought and paid for, legal and proper. Now step aside and let me take what is mine." The cowboys exchanged glances, and Nora felt her hope begin to crumble. These were working men, not heroes from a dime novel. They had no reason to risk their lives for a stranger. She closed her eyes, waiting for rough hands to drag her back to that locked room, to that terrible fate she could not bear to imagine. "That is interesting," a new voice said, and Nora opened her eyes to see a tall cowboy stepping forward from the shadows beyond the fire. He had been checking on the horses, she realized, and had not been sitting with the others. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with sandy brown hair and eyes that caught the firelight. There was something solid about him, something steady and unmovable. "Because I have lived in this territory for 6 years now, and I have never heard of any law that says a man can own a woman. Slavery was abolished back in '65, if I recall correctly." "This is different," Cyrus snarled. "Her man sold her to me to settle a debt. It is a contract, all legal." "A contract signed under duress is not legal," the cowboy said calmly. He stepped fully into the firelight, and Nora saw that he wore a gun on his hip, the holster well worn and sitting easy on his leg. "And I am fairly certain that buying and selling human beings is still illegal, regardless of what kind of paper you wave around. Now, I think you should head back to your saloon, friend. The lady does not want to go with you, and we respect a lady's wishes out here." The other cowboys were standing now, and though they did not draw their weapons, their hands rested on their gun belts. Cyrus looked at them, calculating the odds, his face twisted with rage. "This is not over," he said finally. "That girl owes me money, and I will collect one way or another." "If you have a legal dispute, take it to the sheriff," the tall cowboy said, "but the girl stays here tonight." Cyrus spat into the dirt, then turned and stalked away, his men following. Nora watched them go, her whole body shaking with relief and residual fear. When they had disappeared into the darkness, her legs finally gave out and she sank to the ground. The tall cowboy crouched beside her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentle now. "My ankle," she managed to say. "I fell while climbing down, and he was going to—" She could not finish the sentence. "It is all right now," he said. "You are safe. My name is Mason Porter. What is yours?" "Nora Walsh," she whispered. Mason turned to the other cowboys. "Tom, get some water. Jake, see if we have any bandages in the supply wagon. The rest of you double the watch tonight. I do not trust Malone to give up that easily." The cowboys sprang into action, and Mason helped Nora to a seat on a log near the fire. When Tom brought the water, Mason handed her the canteen and waited while she drank. Jake returned with bandages, and Mason carefully removed Nora's shoe to examine her ankle. "It is swollen, but I do not think it is broken," he said. "Just a bad sprain. We will wrap it up and keep you off it for a few days." His hands were gentle as he worked, wrapping the bandage with practiced efficiency. "I am sorry for what happened to you. No woman should have to endure such treatment." "Thank you," Nora said, and then, to her embarrassment, she began to cry again. She had been so strong, had held herself together through so much, but now that she was safe, all the emotions she had been holding back came flooding out. Mason did not tell her to stop crying or try to make empty reassurances. He simply sat beside her, a steady presence, and let her cry until she had no more tears left. When she finally fell silent, wiping her face with the back of her hand, he spoke. "We are headed north to Colorado," he said. "We have a contract to deliver this herd to a ranch outside of Durango. You are welcome to travel with us if you want. It will be hard travel, and we cannot offer much in the way of comfort, but you will be safe. Once we reach Durango, you can decide what you want to do next. Maybe find work there or travel on to wherever you have family." "I do not have any family," Nora said quietly. "They are all gone, and I do not have anything, no money, no possessions, nothing. Samuel took everything." "Samuel, the man who sold you," she nodded, shame burning in her chest. "He was my first love. We grew up together. I thought we would marry, build a life together. I was such a fool." "You were not a fool," Mason said firmly. "You trusted someone you loved. That does not make you foolish. It makes him a coward and a scoundrel." He stood up, adding another log to the fire. "Get some rest, Miss Walsh. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." Nora lay down on a bedroll that one of the other cowboys had provided, wrapped in a thick blanket against the cold night air. She watched the stars wheel slowly overhead and listened to the sounds of the camp, the crackling fire, the soft movements of the horses, the low voices of the men on watch. For the first time in 2 days, she felt something other than terror. She felt hope. The cattle drive moved slowly north, covering perhaps 15 miles a day through the red rock country of southeastern Utah. Nora rode in the supply wagon driven by Tom, an older cowboy with a gray beard and a kind smile. Her ankle healed slowly, and as it did, she began to help around the camp. She cooked meals, mended clothes, and tended to minor injuries. The cowboys treated her with respect and a kind of protective courtesy that warmed her heart. Mason Porter was the trail boss, she learned. He owned a small ranch in Colorado and had brought his cowboys down to Utah to pick up this herd. He was quiet and serious, but there was a dry humor in him that emerged in unexpected moments. He checked on Nora every day, asking how her ankle was healing, making sure she had everything she needed. 2 weeks into the journey, as they made camp near a shallow river, Nora finally felt strong enough to walk without pain. She helped Tom unhitch the wagon horses, then wandered down to the riverbank to wash her face and hands. The water was cold and clear, fed by snowmelt from the distant mountains, and she knelt on the smooth stones, cupping water in her palms. "It is beautiful country," Mason said, and she turned to see him standing a few feet away, his hat in his hands. "I never get tired of seeing it." "It is beautiful," Nora agreed. "I have lived in Monticello my whole life, but I have never traveled much beyond it. I did not realize how big the world was." Mason sat down on a large rock near the water's edge. "Your ankle seems better." "It is. Much better." "Thank you for letting me travel with you, Mr. Porter. You saved my life." "Mason," he said, "and you do not need to thank me. Any decent man would have done the same." "I do not think that is true," Nora said softly. "I think there are many men who would have looked the other way, who would have decided it was not their problem." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the gentle sound of the water flowing over the stones. Then Mason spoke again, his voice careful. "Tom tells me you have been asking about work opportunities in Durango. What kind of work are you looking for?" "Anything honest," Nora said. "I can cook, clean, so. I helped my parents run their small farm for years. I am not afraid of hard work." "What if you did not have to work for someone else?" Mason asked. "What if you could have your own place again?" Nora looked at him in surprise. "I could never afford land of my own. Samuel took everything my parents left me." "I have been thinking," Mason said slowly, and she noticed that his hands were gripping his hat tightly as though he was nervous. "My ranch is not large, but it is profitable. I have a good herd, good grazing land, a solid house, but it is a lot for one man to manage alone. I have been meaning to hire a housekeeper for a while now, someone to help with the cooking and such. The work is hard, but the pay is fair, and you would have your own room, your own space. If you wanted the position, it is yours." Nora's heart beat faster. "You would do that for me? Take a chance on someone you barely know?" "I think I know enough," Mason said, meeting her eyes. "I know you are brave, I know you are strong, I know you work hard and do not complain. That is more than enough for me." "Then yes," Nora said, feeling a smile spread across her face for the first time in what felt like forever. "Yes, I would very much like that position." Mason smiled back, and Nora noticed that his whole face changed when he smiled. The serious lines around his mouth softened, and his eyes crinkled at the corners. It was a good face, she thought. An honest face. They reached Durango 3 weeks later, a bustling town in the southwestern corner of Colorado Territory. Mason delivered his herd to the ranch that had purchased them, collected his payment, and then led his small group of cowboys west toward his own property. It was another 2 days of travel through pine forests and mountain meadows, and when they finally crested a ridge and Nora saw the ranch spread out in the valley below, she caught her breath. It was more beautiful than she had imagined. The ranch house was built of sturdy logs, with a wide porch and a stone chimney. Behind it were a barn, a corral, and several smaller outbuildings. A creek ran through the property, lined with cottonwood trees that were just beginning to show the green of spring. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still white with snow. "Welcome to the Porter Ranch," Mason said, and there was pride in his voice. The house was neat and clean, though clearly in need of a woman's touch. Mason showed Nora to her room, a small space with a real bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. After sleeping on the ground for weeks, it felt like unimaginable luxury. "The kitchen is downstairs," Mason said. "Help yourself to whatever you need." Tom and the other hands live in the bunkhouse, but they take their meals here in the main house. "I will show you around the property tomorrow, introduce you to the stock. But for tonight, just rest. You have earned it." Nora settled into life on the Porter Ranch with surprising ease. She rose early each morning to prepare breakfast for Mason and the hands: coffee, bacon, biscuits, and sometimes eggs from the chickens that scratched around the yard. She cleaned the house, mended clothes, tended the vegetable garden that was just beginning to sprout with the warming weather. The work was hard, but it was satisfying in a way that made her feel useful and valued. Mason was a fair employer and a kind man. He worked alongside his hands, never asking them to do anything he would not do himself. He was patient when teaching Nora the rhythms of ranch life, showing her how to care for the horses, how to watch for signs of illness in the cattle, how to read the weather in the clouds that gathered over the mountains. As the weeks passed and spring turned toward summer, Nora found herself looking forward to the quiet moments she shared with Mason, the conversations over morning coffee, the evenings on the porch after supper, when they would watch the sun set over the mountains. He told her about growing up in Texas, about learning the ranching trade from his father, about coming to Colorado to build something of his own. She told him about her childhood in Monticello, about her parents, about the dreams she had once held. She did not talk much about Samuel, and Mason did not press her. But one evening in late June, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the dusk, she found the words coming unbidden. "I keep thinking about what I did wrong," she said quietly. "What I could have done differently to make him love me enough not to betray me." Mason was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "You did nothing wrong, Nora. Love should not be something you have to earn through perfect behavior. Real love is not conditional like that. Real love means standing by someone even when it is hard, even when it costs you something. That man Samuel, he did not truly love you, because if he had, he would have found any other way to solve his problems. He would have worked himself to the bone, sold everything he owned, begged on the streets if he had to, but he would not have sold you." Nora felt tears prick her eyes, but they were different from the tears she had shed before. These tears felt like healing. "How do you know so much about love, Mason Porter?" "I do not know if I know much about it," he admitted, "but I know what I was taught. My parents were married for 30 years before my father died. I saw the way he looked at my mother, the way he treated her like she was precious beyond measure. That is what love should be. Anything less is just using someone. Your parents sound like wonderful people." "They were," Mason said. "I miss them, but I am grateful for what they taught me." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead. Nora realized that something had shifted inside her. The pain of Samuel's betrayal was still there, but it no longer consumed her. She was beginning to see it for what it was: not a reflection of her worth, but a revelation of his weakness. And in seeing that, she was beginning to heal. July brought the height of summer to the Colorado mountains. Nora worked in the garden, harvesting lettuce and radishes and the first of the peas. She made jam from wild strawberries that grew along the creek. She learned to ride, borrowing one of the gentler horses from the string, and began accompanying Mason on rides around the property. It was during one of these rides, as they checked on cattle in a high meadow, that they saw smoke rising from the direction of a neighboring ranch. "That is the Peterson place," Mason said, his face grim. "Something is wrong." They rode hard toward the smoke and found the Peterson family frantically trying to save their barn from a fire that had started in the hay loft. Mason immediately jumped down and began helping, organizing the effort to create a bucket brigade from the well to the barn. Nora worked alongside the Peterson women, passing buckets until her arms ached and her dress was soaked with water and sweat. They managed to save part of the barn, though the hay loft was completely destroyed. When the fire was finally out, everyone collapsed in exhausted relief. Mrs. Peterson, a stout woman with flour-dusted hands, embraced Nora with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you both so much. If you had not come when you did, we would have lost everything." "Neighbors help neighbors," Mason said simply. "That is how we survive out here." The Petersons insisted they stay for supper, and as they sat around the table with the family, Nora felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the meal. This was community. This was belonging. This was what she had been searching for without realizing it. On the ride home, under a sky brilliant with stars, Mason reached over and took Nora's hand. It was the first time he had touched her beyond the practical necessities of teaching her to ride or helping her down from a wagon. His hand was warm and calloused and steady, and Nora felt her breath catch in her throat. "Nora," he said, and then stopped as though he was not sure how to continue. "Yes," she prompted gently. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I know you came here as my housekeeper. I know that was the arrangement we made. But somewhere along the way my feelings changed. You changed them. And I need you to know that when I look at you, I do not see an employee. I see a remarkable woman. I see someone strong and kind and brave. I see someone I want to share my life with." Nora's heart was pounding so hard she thought he must surely hear it. "Mason, I am not asking for an answer right now," he said quickly. "I know you have been hurt. I know you need time to heal, to trust again. I just needed you to know how I feel. And I want you to know that I will wait as long as you need. If you only ever want to be my housekeeper and my friend, I will respect that. But if someday you think you might feel the same way I do, I would count myself the luckiest man alive." They had reached the ranch, and Mason helped her down from her horse. For a moment, they stood close together in the moonlight, and Nora looked up into his face. She thought about Samuel, about the boy who had seemed so passionate and exciting, who had swept her up in grand declarations and thrilling promises. And then she thought about Mason, who showed his care through steady actions, who gave without demanding anything in return, who offered love without conditions. "I think I am already beginning to feel the same way," she said softly. "And that terrifies me." "I know," Mason said. "But I promise you, Nora Walsh, I will never give you reason to regret trusting me. I will spend every day proving that I am worthy of that trust." He did not kiss her that night. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently and then stepped back, giving her space, giving her time. And somehow, that restraint meant more than any passionate embrace could have. The summer days grew longer and warmer. Nora and Mason fell into a new rhythm, one that acknowledged the feelings growing between them while still moving at a pace that felt safe to Nora. Mason courted her with quiet thoughtfulness, picking wildflowers and leaving them on the kitchen table, saving the best cuts of meat for her plate, teaching her to fish in the creek on Sunday afternoons when the work was done. In August, Mason took Nora to a barn dance at the Peterson Ranch. It was the first time Nora had danced since before her parents died, and she felt shy as Mason led her onto the floor. But he was a surprisingly good dancer, and soon she was laughing as they spun through a reel, her skirts flying around her ankles. "You have been holding out on me, Mason Porter," she said breathlessly when the dance ended. "Where did you learn to dance like that?" "My mother insisted," he said with a grin. "She said a man who could not dance was only half civilized." They danced every dance together, and when the evening ended and they drove home under a canopy of stars, Nora leaned her head on Mason's shoulder and felt completely, perfectly happy. September brought the first hints of autumn. The aspens on the mountainsides began to turn gold, and the air took on a crisp quality that spoke of coming winter. Mason and his hands spent long days gathering and sorting cattle, preparing for the fall sale. Nora preserved vegetables from the garden, put up jars of pickles and tomatoes and beans, made apple butter from fruit gathered from a wild orchard in the canyon. One evening, as Nora was washing dishes after supper, Mason came into the kitchen carrying something small and carefully wrapped in cloth. "I want to show you something," he said. Nora dried her hands and followed him out to the porch. He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of leaves and flowers. "I made this," he said. "I have been working on it in the evenings in the barn. I wanted to give you something that was truly from me, made with my own hands." Nora took the box, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "Mason, it is beautiful. But why open it?" he said. Inside the box, nestled on a piece of velvet, was a ring. It was simple but lovely, a thin gold band with a small diamond that caught the lamplight. "Nora Walsh," Mason said, and his voice was shaking slightly. "I know we have only known each other for 6 months. I know that is not very long, but I also know that I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You make me want to be a better man. You make this house feel like a home. You make every day brighter just by being in it. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Nora looked at the ring, then at Mason's face, at the hope and nervousness and love she saw there. She thought about Samuel, about the grand gestures and empty promises. And then she thought about Mason, about the way he had protected her, respected her, given her space to heal. She thought about the quiet strength of him, the kindness, the absolute reliability. She thought about the way her heart lifted when she heard his footsteps on the porch, the way she found herself watching for his return when he was out on the range, the way his smile made her feel warm from the inside out. "Yes," she said, and her voice was clear and strong. "Yes, Mason Porter, I will marry you." Mason let out a breath she had not realized he was holding, and then he was pulling her into his arms, holding her close. She felt his heart beating against her cheek, fast and strong. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You have made me the happiest man in Colorado," he said. "When do you want to get married?" Nora asked, looking down at the ring on her finger. "As soon as you are ready," Mason said. "Tomorrow if you want, or next month, next year, whenever feels right to you." "What about October?" Nora suggested. "After the fall sale, when things are quieter, we could have a small ceremony here at the ranch with our friends." "That sounds perfect," Mason said. They were married on a brilliant October afternoon, with the aspens blazing gold on the mountainsides and the sky a deep, endless blue. Mrs. Peterson helped Nora make a dress from cream-colored silk that a traveling merchant had brought through Durango. Mason wore his best suit, and someone had convinced him to get a haircut, though Nora thought he looked handsome regardless. The ceremony was held in front of the ranch house, with a circuit preacher officiating. Tom and the ranch hands were there, along with the Petersons and several other neighboring families. It was small and simple and absolutely perfect. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Mason kissed Nora for the first time, a gentle kiss that held the promise of all the days to come. The gathered crowd cheered and someone started playing a fiddle, and suddenly there was music and dancing and laughter. As the sun set and the party continued, Mason pulled Nora aside for a quiet moment. "Are you happy?" he asked. "I am happier than I ever thought possible," Nora said truthfully. "When Samuel sold me, I thought my life was over. I thought I would never trust anyone again, never feel safe again. But you showed me that I was wrong. You showed me what real love looks like. I will spend the rest of my life showing you that every day," Mason promised. They spent their wedding night in the ranch house, in the bedroom that was now theirs together. Mason was patient and gentle, and Nora felt any lingering fears melt away in the warmth of his love. This was nothing like the fumbling encounters she had shared with Samuel, encounters that had left her feeling used and uncertain. With Mason, she felt cherished and safe and deeply, profoundly connected. The winter of 1881 was harsh in the Colorado mountains. Snow fell deep, and there were days when the ranch felt isolated from the rest of the world. But inside the ranch house, Nora and Mason built their life together. They talked for hours by the fire, played cards, read books aloud to each other. Mason taught Nora to play chess, and she discovered she had a talent for strategy that made him laugh and groan in equal measure. In the spring, Nora discovered she was pregnant. She told Mason on a morning in April, when the first green was showing on the cottonwoods and the creek was running high with snowmelt. He picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy, until she was laughing and begging him to put her down. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as though he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." "We are," Nora confirmed, placing his hand on her still flat belly. In November, the doctor thinks. Mason became even more protective and attentive than before. He insisted Nora rest more, worked to take over the heavier chores, hovered over her until she finally had to shoo him away with a laugh. "Mason Porter, I am pregnant, not made of glass," she said. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will be fine." But she loved his concern, loved the way his face lit up every time he looked at her, loved the way he would sometimes place his hand on her growing belly and talk to the baby as though it could already hear him. Their daughter was born on a cold November night, with Mrs. Peterson serving as midwife. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Nora felt certain she could not endure another contraction. But Mason stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement. When the baby finally arrived, her first cries filling the room, Nora wept with relief and overwhelming love. Mason cut the cord with shaking hands, and then Mrs. Peterson placed the baby in Nora's arms, a tiny, perfect girl with dark hair and her father's eyes. "What should we name her?" Mason asked, his voice choked with emotion. Nora thought for a moment, looking down at her daughter's face. "Rose," she said, "for my mother, Rose Ann Porter." "Hello, Rose Ann," Mason said softly, reaching out to stroke his daughter's cheek with one finger. "Welcome to the world, little one. We are so glad you are here." The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Rose grew from a baby to a toddler, into a bright, curious child who followed her father around the ranch and helped her mother in the garden. In 1884, Nora gave birth to their first son, whom they named Matthew after Mason's father. 2 years later came another boy, Thomas, named for faithful Tom, who had become like family to them. The ranch prospered under Mason's management. They expanded their herd, bought additional grazing land, built a new barn. But Mason never forgot the values his parents had taught him: the importance of community, of helping neighbors, of treating everyone with respect regardless of their circumstances. One summer evening in 1889, when Rose was 7 and already showing signs of her father's steady nature and her mother's kindness, a rider came up the road to the ranch house. Nora was on the porch shelling peas, and she looked up as the man dismounted. He was thin and gray, dressed in clothes that had seen better days, and it took her a moment to recognize him. Samuel Thornton. Nora stood slowly, her heart beginning to pound. She had not seen Samuel since that terrible night in Monticello, had not thought about him in years except as a shadow from her past. He looked old now, far older than his 34 years, and there was a defeated slump to his shoulders that spoke of hard living and harder luck. "Nora," he said, and his voice was hoarse. "I heard you were living here. I need to talk to you." Mason appeared from the barn, alerted by some instinct that his wife needed him. He came to stand beside Nora on the porch, and she felt strength flow into her from his presence. "What do you want, Samuel?" she asked, and her voice was calm and steady. "I wanted to tell you I am sorry," Samuel said, "for what I did to you, for selling you like you were nothing. It has haunted me every day since. I have not had a moment of peace, not a moment of luck. Everything I touch turns to dust. I think it is because of what I did to you." "Is that why you came?" Nora asked. "Because you think apologizing will change your luck?" "I do not know," Samuel admitted. "Maybe. I just knew I had to tell you. I had to say I am sorry." Nora looked at this man who had once been everything to her. She felt no anger, no bitterness, no lingering pain. She felt only a distant pity for the broken person standing before her. "I forgive you, Samuel," she said quietly. "Not for your sake, but for mine. I will not carry the weight of your actions anymore. I have built a good life, a life full of love and meaning and true partnership. What you did does not define me. It never did." Samuel nodded slowly, tears streaming down his weathered face. "You were always too good for me," he said. "I see that now. I hope you are happy, Nora. I really do." "I am," she said simply. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible." Samuel climbed back on his horse and rode away, and Nora watched him go without regret. Mason put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am perfect," she said. "Seeing him just reminded me of how far I have come, how much I have been blessed." "We have been blessed," Mason corrected gently. "You and me both." That night, after the children were asleep, Nora and Mason sat on the porch as they had so many times over the years. The stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Nora thought about the frightened girl she had been 8 years ago, shackled in the back room of a saloon, certain her life was over. And she thought about the woman she had become: a wife, a mother, a partner in building something beautiful and lasting. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Mason. "Taking a chance on a stranger bringing me here?" "Not for one single moment," Mason said firmly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Nora Porter. You and our children are my whole world." "And you showed me what real love is," Nora said. "You saved me, Mason. Not just from Cyrus Malone, but from believing I was not worthy of being loved. You showed me that love is not grand gestures or passionate declarations. It is staying. It is showing up every day, even when things are hard. It is choosing each other over and over again." "That is exactly what it is," Mason agreed. He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "And I will keep choosing you every day for the rest of my life." The years continued to pass, bringing the joys and challenges that all lives hold. Rose grew into a compassionate young woman who wanted to be a teacher. Matthew showed a talent for working with horses, gentle and patient like his father. Thomas was the wild one, always climbing too high and riding too fast, keeping his parents constantly on their toes. In 1895, when Rose was 14, a traveling photographer came through Durango and offered to take family portraits. Mason surprised Nora by agreeing, and they dressed in their finest clothes and posed stiffly for the camera. When the photograph came back weeks later, Nora stared at it in wonder. There they were, Mason still handsome, though his hair was beginning to gray at the temples, herself no longer the frightened girl but a confident woman, and their 3 children gathered around them. They looked like what they were, a family, strong and united and full of love. "We should hang this in the parlor," Mason said. "I want one for my room too," Rose said, "so I can always remember us like this." "We will get copies made," Mason promised. As Nora looked at the photograph, she thought about how different her life might have been. If Martha had not helped her escape, if the cattle drive had not been camped near Monticello that night, if Mason had not been the kind of man to stand up to Cyrus Malone. Her life had turned on those moments, on those choices made by herself and others. But she had not been passive in her own rescue. She had been brave enough to climb out that window, to run toward an uncertain future. She had been strong enough to heal, to trust again, to open her heart to love when every instinct told her to protect herself. And she had been wise enough to recognize real love when it was offered to her, not the flashy, unstable passion of youth, but the steady, enduring love of a good man. In 1900, Rose married a young teacher from Durango, a kind man with gentle eyes who reminded Nora powerfully of Mason. The wedding was held at the ranch, much larger than Nora and Mason's simple ceremony had been, and Nora cried happy tears as she watched her daughter dance with her new husband. "They remind me of us," Mason said, watching them. "They do," Nora agreed. "I pray they will be as happy as we have been." Matthew married 2 years later, a rancher's daughter from the next valley over, and they built a small cabin on the far edge of the Porter property. Thomas, true to form, announced at age 18 that he was going to explore the world before settling down, and set off for California with their blessing and a promise to write often. As Nora and Mason grew older, they spent more time on the porch together, watching sunsets and talking about the years behind them and the years still to come. They became grandparents, first to Rose's 3 children, then to Matthew's twin girls. The ranch house filled with laughter and noise during holiday visits, and Nora loved every chaotic moment. On their 25th wedding anniversary, in October of 1906, Mason took Nora on a trip to Denver. It was the first time either of them had been to a big city, and they marveled at the electric lights, the motor cars, the bustling crowds. But after a week, they were both eager to return to the ranch, to the quiet mountains and open sky. "I am a ranch hand at heart," Mason said as they rode the train home. "I need space around me, need to see the horizon." "Me too," Nora said, resting her head on his shoulder. "Besides, all those people made me nervous. I kept thinking about how close I came to ending up in a city like that, sold to the highest bidder." "That did not happen," Mason said firmly, "and it never will. You are exactly where you belong, Nora, with me on our ranch surrounded by family." In 1910, Thomas finally returned from his wandering, bringing with him a bride, a spirited woman from San Francisco who took to ranch life with surprising enthusiasm. They settled in Durango and opened a mercantile, but visited the ranch often. Nora was 51 now, her dark hair streaked with silver, and Mason was 55, his face weathered by years in the sun but still handsome to her eyes. They moved a little slower than they once had, but they still rode together, still worked side by side, still talked for hours on the porch in the evenings. One night, as they sat watching the stars, Nora thought about the girl she had been at 22, standing in that saloon, watching her world crumble. She thought about how certain she had been that her life was over, that she would never be happy or safe again. "What are you thinking about?" Mason asked, noticing her faraway expression. "About how wrong I was," Nora said. "Back in Monticello, I thought what Samuel did to me was the end of my story, but it was just the beginning. It was the moment that led me to you, to this life, to everything that matters. I am grateful every day that you ran toward that campfire," Mason said. "Grateful that you were brave enough to ask for help, grateful that I was there to give it." "You gave me so much more than help," Nora said. "You gave me hope. You gave me love. You showed me that I was worth loving, worth cherishing. You healed wounds I did not even know I had." Mason took her hand, his touch as gentle and steady as it had been that first night by the campfire 29 years ago. "And you gave me purpose," he said. "You turned a house into a home. You gave me children, grandchildren, a family to build a legacy for. You are my everything, Nora Porter." They sat in silence for a while, holding hands, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch at night, the soft lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods, the distant call of an owl. This was their life, built on foundations of trust and respect and steady, enduring love. "Do you know what the best part is?" Nora asked. "What?" Mason replied. "Knowing that if I had to do it all over again, all the pain, all the fear, all the hardship of that time, I would, because it led me here, to you. That is how I feel about everything in my life," Mason said. "Every choice I made, every path I took, led me to that moment by the campfire when you ran into our camp, and I would not change a single thing." Years continued to pass in the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Rose's children grew up and had children of their own. Matthew expanded his operation and became known throughout the region for his fine horses. Thomas prospered with his store in Durango. The Porter Ranch remained a gathering place for the extended family, a constant in a rapidly changing world. In 1918, the world was at war and young men from all over Colorado were being called to serve. Nora and Mason's grandson, Rose's oldest son, enlisted despite his family's concerns. They gathered at the ranch to see him off, and Nora held him tight, remembering other goodbyes, other fears. "Come back to us," she whispered. "I will, Grandma," he promised. "I am a Porter. We keep our promises." He did come back 2 years later, changed by what he had seen but fundamentally himself. At the welcome home party on the ranch, as Nora watched 3 generations of her family gathered together, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Her life could have been so different. It could have been tragic. Instead, it had been beautiful. Mason found her standing by herself near the barn, tears streaming down her face. "Are you all right?" he asked with concern. "I am just so happy," she said. "So grateful. Look at what we built, Mason. Look at this family, these good people. We did that. You and me together." "We did," Mason agreed, pulling her close. "And I am grateful every single day." They were in their 60s now, officially retired from the day-to-day work of the ranch, though they still kept their hand in, still offered advice and wisdom. Matthew had taken over managing the Porter Ranch, and he ran it with the same values his father had taught him: fairness, hard work, respect for the land and the animals. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1921, the family threw a huge celebration at the ranch. There were nearly 50 people present: children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, neighbors, and friends. Someone had hired musicians, and there was dancing and singing and more food than even that crowd could consume. Rose stood up to make a toast. "To my parents," she said, her voice ringing out clear and strong, "who showed all of us what love really means, who built not just a successful ranch but a family legacy of kindness and integrity, who proved that the greatest adventure is not traveling to exotic places or seeking thrills, but committing to another person and building a life together, day by day, year by year. We love you both so much." Everyone cheered and clinked glasses, and Nora looked at Mason through happy tears. He raised his glass to her, and she saw everything in his eyes: 40 years of love, of partnership, of choosing each other every day. They danced that night, slower than they once had but no less joyful. As they turned in circles on the makeshift dance floor, Nora thought about that barn dance in 1881, when she had first felt truly happy after her ordeal. She thought about all the dances since then, all the moments of joy and connection. "What are you thinking about?" Mason asked. "About how you taught me to dance again," Nora said. "Not just literally, though you did that too, but you taught me that it was safe to be happy again, safe to trust again, safe to love again." "You taught me the same thing," Mason said. "Before you, I did not know what I was missing. I thought a successful ranch was enough, but you showed me that the ranch was just wood and land without someone to share it with, someone to give it meaning." As the celebration wound down and family members began the journey back to their own homes, Rose pulled her mother aside. "Mother, I have been thinking about something. We should write down your story, about what happened in Monticello, about how you met Father, about building this life together. It is an important story and the great-grandchildren should know it." Nora hesitated. She had never liked dwelling on that dark time, preferring to focus on all the good years that had followed. But Rose was right, it was an important story, not because of the hardship, but because of the hope. "All right," she agreed, "but we tell the whole story, the darkness and the light. Because you cannot truly appreciate one without understanding the other." Over the next months, Nora told her story to Rose, who wrote it all down in careful script. It was harder than Nora had expected, dredging up those old memories. But it was also cathartic, a final releasing of any remaining shadows. And seeing it all written out, seeing the full arc from that terrified girl to this contented woman, Nora felt proud. Not just of surviving, but of thriving, of choosing healing over bitterness, love over fear. When the manuscript was complete, Rose had it bound in leather and presented it to her mother. "Your story, Mother, for all of us, and for all the Porters who will come after." Nora held the book in her hands, feeling its weight. This was her legacy, more valuable than land or money. This was proof that no matter how dark things seemed, there was always hope for a better tomorrow. This was evidence that real love existed, that it could heal even the deepest wounds. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Springs brought newborn calves and green grass. Summers brought long days and hard work. Falls brought the brilliant colors of changing leaves and the satisfaction of harvest. Winters brought snow and cold, and the warmth of family gathered around the fire. In 1925, Mason began to slow down noticeably. He had always been so strong, so vital, but now he tired more easily, moved more stiffly. The doctor said his heart was wearing out, that he needed to rest more. Nora became fiercely protective, insisting he stay in bed when he was having a bad day, bringing him his meals, reading to him for hours. "I am supposed to be taking care of you," Mason grumbled one day. "We take care of each other," Nora corrected. "That is how marriage works. You have taken care of me for 44 years. Let me return the favor." They spent more and more time on the porch, wrapped in blankets even on cold days, just being together. They talked about everything and nothing, memories from decades past, thoughts about the future, observations about the birds at the feeder. They held hands and watched the mountains change colors as the sun moved across the sky. "I have had a good life," Mason said one October afternoon. The aspens were gold again, just as they had been on their wedding day all those years ago. The best life any man could ask for. "We are not done yet," Nora said firmly, though fear clutched at her heart. "We have many more years ahead of us." "Maybe," Mason said peacefully. "But if we do not, I want you to know that I have no regrets. You gave me everything, Nora. You made me happier than I ever dreamed possible." "Mason Porter, stop talking like that," Nora said, her voice breaking. "You are not allowed to leave me." "I will stay as long as I can," Mason promised. "But when my time comes, I need you to promise me something. Promise me you will not stop living. Promise me you will keep enjoying this beautiful life, keep spending time with our family, keep finding joy in every day. Can you promise me that?" "I do not want to think about it," Nora said. "Promise me," Mason insisted gently. "I promise," Nora whispered. "But only because I know you will be there for many more years to make sure I keep that promise." Mason smiled and squeezed her hand, and they sat together, watching the sun set over the mountains they both loved so much. That winter was mild, and Mason rallied somewhat, regaining a bit of his strength. By spring, he was well enough to walk around the ranch again, checking on the cattle and horses, offering advice to Matthew. Nora allowed herself to hope that they had many more years together. They celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary in October of 1926. It was a smaller gathering than their 40th, just their children and grandchildren, closest neighbors and friends. But it was warm and joyful, full of laughter and love. That night, as they prepared for bed, Mason pulled Nora into his arms. 45 years, he marveled. "Where did the time go?" "I do not know," Nora said, "but I would not trade a single moment of it. Not even that first terrifying night when you ran into our camp." "Especially not that night," Nora said. "That was the night my real life began." They made love gently that night, their bodies familiar after so many years together. Afterward, Nora fell asleep in Mason's arms, feeling safe and cherished, just as she had every night for 45 years. She woke in the early morning to find Mason still beside her, but something was wrong. He was not breathing. She touched his face and found it cold. "Mason," she said, though she already knew. "Mason, no, please no," but he was gone. He had slipped away peacefully in the night, held in the arms of the woman he loved in the home they had built together. The grief was crushing. Even though Nora had known this day would come eventually, had tried to prepare herself, the reality of Mason's absence was overwhelming. She moved through the funeral in a daze, accepted condolences from what seemed like half of Colorado, stood at the graveside in the family plot on the ranch and watched as they lowered him into the ground. In the days and weeks that followed, Nora struggled to find her footing. The house felt too empty, too quiet without Mason's presence. She found herself setting two places at the table out of habit, starting to tell him something before remembering he was not there to hear it. But she had made him a promise, and Nora Walsh Porter had never broken a promise in her life. She forced herself to get out of bed each morning. She helped care for her great-grandchildren. She tended her garden. She went for walks around the ranch, visiting all the places that held memories of Mason. And slowly, gradually, the crushing grief began to transform into something else, a deep, abiding gratitude for the years they had shared. She began to remember not just that he was gone, but that he had been there at all. She began to focus not on the loss, but on the incredible gift of having loved and been loved so completely. Rose moved back to the ranch to stay with her mother, bringing her warmth and companionship. They spent evenings on the porch, just as Nora and Mason had, and Nora told her daughter stories about Mason, about their life together, about the lessons she had learned. "The thing about real love," Nora said one night, "is that it does not end when someone dies. Mason is still with me in everything we built together, in our children and grandchildren, in the values we shared. He taught me that love is not just a feeling, it is a choice, an action, a commitment. And that kind of love does not die. It just changes form." 2 years after Mason's death, Nora was standing at his grave as she did every week when she heard a rider approaching. She turned to see an old man on a tired horse, and with a shock, she recognized Samuel Thornton. He was ancient now, his face a map of hard years and harder choices. He dismounted slowly as though his bones ached and approached Nora with his hat in his hands. "I heard about Mason," he said. "I came to pay my respects. He was a good man." "The best man," Nora agreed. "I also came to say goodbye," Samuel said. "I am dying. The doctor gives me maybe a month. I wanted to see you one more time before I go, to tell you again how sorry I am." Nora looked at this shell of a man and felt nothing but pity. "I forgave you a long time ago, Samuel. You need to forgive yourself." "I do not think I can," Samuel said. "I destroyed my own life. I had love, real love, and I threw it away for nothing. I have spent every day since regretting it." "Then learn from it," Nora said. "Use whatever time you have left to make peace with yourself, with God, with whoever needs your forgiveness. Do not waste your last days in regret." Samuel nodded slowly. "You were always wiser than me, kinder too. I am glad you found happiness, Nora. You deserved it." He rode away, and Nora never saw him again. She heard later that he had died in a boarding house in Durango, alone except for the woman who ran the place. She prayed for him then, hoping he had found peace at the end. Nora lived on at the ranch, surrounded by family, for another 5 years. She saw great-great-grandchildren born. She celebrated her children's golden wedding anniversaries. She tended her garden and told her stories and enjoyed every sunrise, every sunset, every precious moment of life. On a warm June morning in 1933, Nora woke feeling tired but peaceful. Rose was there, as she always was, bringing her mother breakfast in bed. "How are you feeling today, Mother?" Rose asked. "I am ready," Nora said simply. "I have had such a beautiful life, such a blessed life, but I am ready to see your father again." "Do not talk like that," Rose said, though tears were already streaming down her face. "You are strong. You will be here for years yet." "Maybe," Nora said with a smile. "But if not, do not grieve too much. I have lived more fully than most people who have twice as many years. I survived the worst thing I could imagine, and I found joy on the other side of it. I loved deeply and was loved deeply in return. I built a family, a legacy, a life full of meaning. What more could anyone ask for?" She ate a little breakfast, drank some water, and then settled back against her pillows. "Tell me a story, Rose. Tell me about when you were a little girl on the ranch." Rose sat beside her mother's bed and talked, her voice soft and soothing, painting pictures with words of summer days chasing butterflies, of winter evenings by the fire, of her father teaching her to ride, of her mother singing while she worked in the kitchen. And as she talked, Nora's eyes slowly closed, a gentle smile on her face. She died peacefully that afternoon, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. There were tears, of course, but there was also gratitude for a life well lived, a legacy well built. They buried her beside Mason on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The entire community came to pay their respects to a woman who had touched so many lives with her kindness, her strength, her quiet wisdom. Rose stood at the graveside. Her own children and grandchildren gathered around her and spoke the eulogy. My mother's life teaches us that our beginnings do not define us. She could have let what Samuel did to her make her bitter and afraid. Instead, she chose to heal. She chose to trust again. She chose love. And because of those choices, all of us are here today. Every person in this crowd exists because one cowboy was brave enough to stand up for what was right, and one young woman was brave enough to accept real love when it was offered to her. That is my mother's legacy, not just the land or the ranch, but the proof that love, real love, can heal even the deepest wounds and build something beautiful that lasts for generations. The Porter Ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations. Rose's children and grandchildren maintained it, keeping the values that Mason and Nora had established: hard work, integrity, community, respect for the land. The story of how Nora and Mason met became family legend, told and retold to each new generation, a reminder of where they came from and what they stood for. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun sets gold over the mountains and the wind whispers through the cottonwoods, those who live on the ranch say they can feel the presence of the couple who started it all: the cowboy who knew what real love meant, and the woman who was brave enough to trust him. Their love story did not end with death. It lives on in every act of kindness, every moment of courage, every choice to love despite fear. It lives on in the land they worked, the home they built, the family they raised. It lives on in the understanding that real love is not about grand gestures or passionate declarations, but about showing up every day, choosing each other, building something beautiful together one moment at a time. And that is a legacy that will never die.